Episode 317, World Soil Day. This is the Change Underground. I'm your host, John Moore. Decarbonise the air, recarbonise the soil. Quote, the Food and Agriculture Organisation of the United Nations, FAO, will celebrate World Soil Day 2022 and launch its first global report on black soils at a hybrid event in Rome on Monday, December the 5th. The theme of this year's event is Soils, Where Food Begins. 95% of the food we eat comes directly or indirectly from our soils, according to the FAO. However, about 1/3 of our soils are already degraded, and the level of vitamins and nutrients in food has fallen drastically over the last 70 years. End quote. The FAO Global Soil Partnership page, link in the show notes, claims, and I quote, World Soil Day, WSD, is held annually on the 5th of December as a means to focus attention on the importance of healthy soil and advocating for the sustainable management of soil resources, end quote. Searching around academic papers, the loss of nutrients in food is a contentious issue. The papers seem to come down 50-50 on either side. Dr. Christine Jones, of a Focus on Photosynthesis fame, seems to think we have lost nutrient density in our foods, and the removal of the inputs with a side at the end, as well as artificial fertilisers, will go a long way to fixing this problem. I'm not sure, but I think following basic regenerative techniques will go a long way in the right direction. If we happen to reverse a decline in nutrient density, that's a bonus. The theme, Soil Where Food Begins, has been an unstated theme of this podcast since 1 February 2016. When I published that first episode. If we can spread the word not just on the 5th of December, but every day of the year, we may see an acceleration in the saving of both those soils and the food we produce, and we need to do this quickly. With the changes in climate at present and ongoing, we have instituted changes that are going to take time to reverse. There's a need for new, newish, and even older varieties of plants to cope with the changing conditions. Quote, could the key to feeding the world with a changing climate be hiding in a 300-year-old museum collection? That's what one of the hopes of the scientists combing through 12,000 specimens of wheat and its relatives held in the Natural History Museum's archives. The most promising samples are having their genomes sequenced in a bid to identify the genetic secrets of hardier wheat varieties. Climate change and pests and diseases are putting the crop under pressure, and that's from the BBC site. We've discussed the importance of seed banks libraries in previous episodes, number 52, 65, 74, 238, 275 and 314. So again, another continuing theme perhaps. The real shame is the loss of local varieties, especially in the developing world, of locally adapted generations-old seeds with the Green Revolution. This was a push by the World Bank and the IMF to place hybridised, fertiliser-dependent seed varieties into the hands of the developing world's farmers. These varieties were selected for output over just about anything else. And to be fair, Norman Borlaug, the father of the Green Revolution, who got a Nobel Prize for it, did see it as a stopgap measure to relieve hunger. And as a young fella, I was born in 1961, I remember news reports of famines from about 1968 and all the way through the 70s. Things were crook. Borlaug probably did save the billion lives he is credited with, but the costs were horrendous. The context is important. These seeds were developed for the mechanised agricultural world, tractors, paved roads, good communication, and an established agricultural education system, and so on. To force these things onto individuals with a primary school education, animal motive power, think oxen, donkeys and horses, with little access to the understanding of mixing fertilisers and the more troubling herbicides and pesticides that these production-focused seeds mostly needed, as they weren't selected for resistance to pests nor low-fertility soils, was a time bomb waiting to explode. The Indian, I'm assuming elsewhere, farmer suicide rates of today are a direct reflection of the Green Revolution. Farmers were told to toss out their old, in inverted commas, primitive seeds and to buy these new ones. And here's some loans to purchase the fertilisers, herbicides and pesticides you'll need to grow these new U-Butte wonder seeds. The argument being that the yields would be so much higher than the old seeds that the loans would be paid off in a season. Things did not always go well. Droughts, floods, conflict, or just a badly timed hailstorm, and the debt repayments could not be met. Between 1995 and 2014, nearly 300,000 Indian farmers killed themselves. Now, not all based upon debt, obviously, but apparently the vast majority were. There's a link in the show notes to that. The sheer size of the loss of seed varieties is unknown, possibly unknowable. I've heard stories of different valleys in Indonesia with valley-specific varieties based upon local microclimate conditions all being lost. We may well have a wide selection of variety in the seed banks, museums, or is that musea for the plural form of museum? Anyway, and in private hands, but oh, what we have lost. So whilst Monday the 5th is World Soil Day, Saturday the 3rd was International Day of People with Disabilities, IDPWD for short. And I came across an interesting piece on the ABC website entitled Bordertown sheep farmer Stuart Staude runs his busy property and new stud business from a wheelchair. I thought this was an appropriate story for this time of the year. Quote, Stuart Staude, 34, is busy overseeing farmhands, preparing his sheep for hot weather before it sets in. He lost stock last summer and isn't taking any chances this season. Stuart is like any other livestock producer, out every day, looking after his sheep, checking fences, organising workers and attending to never-ending bookwork. But instead of running the farm from the seat of his ute, Stuart runs it from a wheelchair. Farming is the family business, and even after a serious workplace accident that almost took his life, Stuart was determined to return to the property near Bordertown, South Australia. End quote. I recommend you have a look at this article. A link, as ever, is in the show notes. There's a tremendous photo of Stuart in his cross-country wheelchair with his dog moving sheep in a paddock. Well worth a look. Change Underground Academy No-Dig Gardening course is still available. Link in the show notes. Please tell your friends. Decarbonise the air, recarbonise the soil. Thank you all for listening, and I'll be back, all things being equal, next weekend. This has been a JM Podcasting Services production. Link in the show notes.